welcome to another exciting episode of Adventuring Academy. I'm your humble Dungeon Master, Brennan Lee Mulligan. This is our vodcast where we talk about all things related to tabletop and running awesome adventures at your table for your friends. Our guest today, oh my lordy, am I so excited for this Dungeon Master extraordinaire. You would know him as one of the co-creators and co-hosts of My Brother and Me, one of my favorite podcasts of all time, an advice podcast for the modern era. You would also know him as the co-host of Schmanners, an etiquette podcast about etiquette in extraordinary times, as well as Bake On, a recap show for the Great British Bake Off, one of the greatest shows of all time, with his wife and co-host Teresa McElroy, co-author of the New York Times bestselling graphic novel The Adventure Zone, with artist Carrie Peach, co-star of the animated film Trolls World Tour. You know him as Magnus Burnside and also Cargo Jones from Tiny Heist. Please welcome my friend and yours, Mr. Travis McElroy.
Hi. You're right. I do too much stuff. You know, hearing it all in a line like that, I need to spend more time with my family. You know what I mean? What do I say? I do all of my shows with my family. What am I talking about? Can I tell you, I'm so excited to talk about you that I didn't ask any questions about what this show is. Are we live? I have no idea.
No,
thank God.
This is live to tape, meaning we don't necessarily do a ton of editing on this, but this will be recorded and released probably some like weeks or maybe even a month or 2 months from now.
I can't go without a net. You know what I mean? People like Matt Mercer. Matt Mercer's out there flying without a net every Thursday or whatever.
Yeah.
I take 2 weeks between each episode and it's recorded and edited.
No, I fully hear you. I feel like that's the funny thing is that every DM out there has like a different work methodology to how they do it. Like the way Matt does it is incredible to me. The way you guys do it is incredible to me. Dimension 20, we will go a long period of time without recording anything. But for example, I don't know when this will be coming out, but so I won't spoil the next one, but we did Pirates of Leviathan, The Unsleeping City Chapter 2, and recorded the side quest following that I don't think has been announced yet, which is, I think, like 34 episodes of Dimension 20. We recorded in 2.5 months, which is a wild amount of storytelling too.
And then you'll take a break for how long?
Let me see. It's probably like we'll have a good 3 to 4 months between that and when the next round of whatever kicks up.
In that amount of time, I would forget everything I know. Period. Like we when we first started doing Adventure Zone, I think for like after the first year or two, we kept saying like, you know what, we'll batch record a bunch of episodes and then we'll just have them. Mm-hmm. And like we'll edit them all together and then we won't have to record for like 2 months. But if we go to like we just put up our Halloween episode 2 weeks after Halloween because and so it took like basically it's a month then between episodes. And I have to like go back and review everything we said in the last episode. I cannot remember. So the idea of going like 3 months between like because the truth is I wouldn't use that time to prepare. I would use that time to play Hades and bake sourdough and everything else, and I'd still prepare 2 days before we recorded.
That the procrastination thing is very, very real. Part of the reason that my long-running home game has moved into having shorter sessions more frequently is because of exactly the phenomenon you're talking about, which is that preparation happens when you look at the calendar and go, "Oh shit," and then realize. That's human nature. I mean, like it's very rare for me to. What's interesting is I now do though have a little bit of a tail on the end of a session. So I'll find that at the end of a session, I'll be a little bit inspired, and part of like decompressing the previous session is I'll do a little bit of prep for the next session right after we end. But yeah, if it's a 6-month break until the next session, it's 2 days of work at the end, and then. Right. 3 before the beginning, and that's how it's going to go.
The weird thing is I know that there are people out there, I've met them, who when they have that, if someone says the project is due at the end of the semester, they're like, cool, I can do 10% of it every week, and then they do, and that to me is like a superpower. where it's like and the thing is it's not that I don't recognize that that's a better way. Of course it is. It's just not the way. And so the way that it ends up working for me is like you said, I kind of similar. We'll finish an episode and immediately I will see like the yes and of what is obvious coming out of that episode that has to happen next time. And then a lot of my prep is just like the gears turn, no pen to paper, no like codified anything, but just like it kind of churning. And occasionally I'll be sitting there and go, oh, okay, yeah, there it is. Like, but it's all pistons and, things firing in my brain. And then like the day before I'll sit down and like actually type it out.
I mean, it's very, very real. Dimension 20 is an interesting thing because of the collaboration with the PCs and with Rick Perry. Yeah. One of the things, and I think you guys know this as a group that does an anthology show, which is what Dimension 20 is, where it's like we go to a new world every time we play, right, unless we're returning to a world we played in before. But we've done, I think, how many seasons have we done now? We've done like 8, and it's been like 6. We have like 6 different worlds we've played in, and so what's interesting is I do a bunch of prep ahead of time, but it's always still based on a deadline of Rick Perry, our incredible set and miniatures builder, needs to know months ahead of time what the battle sets are going to be. So we need to get the PCs locked in before that, which means that we need the general world outlined done before that. So there's all this stuff of like the order things happen in. Like I remember doing a teleconference with you and your bros and your dad probably like 4 months before we actually even ended up playing together, just to give Rick that lead time to all jump in and play.
That was the first time doing Tiny Heist with you. It was the first time I'd ever played with miniatures, like played with anything tangible, because like before I think the closest was we played like Hero Quest when I was a kid, right? And that was like kind of the closest with like, the pre-made boards and things and everything. But other than that, it had always been like just kind of verbal. And man, after doing it, I'm so jealous of people who get to play that way all the time, because it like is so concrete in a way that you can look and be like, I forgot about this guy over here, and I'm going to jump off this ledge. Because there was so much of that came out of specifically the casino, to me, set for Tiny Heist, where we were like, oh, and he's going to play on this cell phone game, and I'm going over here, and I'm going to attack this big tank, because you can physically see the items you could interact with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, Rick Perry does such a good job of just putting opportunities and toys in every section of so that you can have that, like, hitting the jackpot and the coins spill out, or Bean hitting the Four Loko straw, or sorry, Quattro Crazy. And
Thank you. Please.
Branding, of course. But I think that's very interesting too, because it's one of those things. I feel a little bit like a Cassandra, like a prophet calling out to the world, being like, the things that you think are easy are actually harder. Because there's two things that I find beginning DMs will have as assumptions that I always want to challenge, right? The first one, which is what we're referencing, is this idea of one I'll do the one I've talked about on the podcast a lot before, is DMs who go like, I don't want to do a full campaign. I'm going to do something way easier and just run a one shot. And I always go back to that. I think it's Voltaire who literally says, there's someone, I think Voltaire wrote to someone in a letter, like, I'm sorry for writing you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. Right. Which is how I feel about one shots.
I learned this from doing the live shows, where it's just like, it's one episode, one shot, and like trying to make a satisfying story, like one shot, without having any like things to play on and nothing to tease. Everything has to be answered. Everything has to be compact. It all has to be so tight. It's so stressful.
It's way harder. In terms of plot, nothing has ever been easier to me, easier on me as a dungeon master than our sophomore year of Fantasy High, which was live streamed on Twitch and didn't have a set number of episodes when it started. Mm-hmm. It was like, this can end when you get to the end, which is such an incredible you know, the idea of like bringing these side quests in for a landing in 6 episodes, you know, like that's like challenging to do.
Right.
You know, but
and if I may, real quick, the other side of that I've recently started kind of getting more comfortable with is if I set up what I think is going to be this really complex storyline and they make the right decisions and the right roles and it wraps up in like 2 episodes instead of 6 or whatever, great, right? I'm not going to sit there and penalize them for like figuring it out. So if I'm like, oh, I'm going to tease this out over the next like 8 episodes and they're like, wait, is it this? Wait, okay, I want to do an insight check. And I'm like, all right, yeah, you got it. That's it. Done.
Hell yeah. And I think that is such a cool opportunity to be able to have. The second thing that I think a lot of beginning DMs will alight on is they'll say something. I remember hearing a bunch of people back when I was like teaching the game to people or encountering a lot more DMs that were beginning their journey running these games, is I would mention that I always at home play with a battle mat. Like I don't have big, you know, I'm not dropping Dimension 20, you know, production budgets on my home games.
Not, Brennan. I hope, if not, we need to have an intervention, dude. You have responsibilities. You have bills.
I know, I do. There's other things I need to be worried about other than. But so I have a battle mat. I have magic markers, and I'll you know draw a little set on this sort of you know whiteboard kind of thing. And what's so funny is I had people be like, I would tell beginning DMs. I was actually playing in a beginning DMs thing, and I was like, hey, do you want me to bring the battle mat? And they're like, no, like I think we're gonna be way more relaxed than that and way more chill than that. And I had this moment of being like, oh, you think theater of the mind is more chill than a
Well, that's the thing is, and listen, the only reason I'm not doing it is that we're playing virtually. Like if I were a smarter person, I would get really good at Roll20 and I would use Roll20, right? Like in a different world, we've just never used Roll20 for our thing. That's not true. We used it for Amnesty and we used it for when we played Fate. Yeah. So Monster of the Week and Fate. But like, yes, if you're gonna start with Roll20, and do that virtually, because the thing is like when you're DMing and you're trying to give these like there's some chains hanging and there's torches on and you're trying to like lob these prop, you know, interaction ideas up into the air, that's assuming that your players are listening to that and not thinking about their spells and what items they have with them and everything else, because they're thinking about all the different things. And so like that was the thing I had to get over real quick, is like I'd put these things into play that I thought were like, they will latch onto these, obviously, because that's what I would do. And they're thinking like, did I use that spell today? Is that what? Oh, I can't remember if I used that special. And I'm like, hey, you remember that chair I mentioned? And they're like, I don't really care about the chair. It's nothing.
And I think too that, again, it's one of those things where I'm going to reveal. I think I'm going to reveal in this moment how uptight I can be. But again, what's so interesting is, to me, there are different things in the world where I believe they are incorrectly seen as being crunchy or rules lawyery, when I see them as diffusing tension. When you're playing Theater of the Mind and a player character says, oh, there's 8 enemies in the room, I'm going to hit them with a fireball. And now you as a DM have to have a negotiation with, how involved in the melee are you? How many can you hit in a sphere? Do we randomize it? Do we do whatever? If you're playing with a battle mat, I can go to the kitchen and get snacks, and the person's like, I'm casting fireball. How many do I hit? And I'm like, you tell me, dog. I'm getting cookies. Like,
well, that is, I will say though, that is where you and I might differ though, because for me, like doing battle, I'm less worried about who they attack and how many times they have to hit them to kill them or whatever, as I am how involved are the players feeling in the combat. Where if you have somebody who's just like, I cast this spell again and again and again, or it's like, I swing my sword again, I swing my sword again, I swing my sword again. That to me is like, I don't think I have you then. I want you to be like jumping off of tables, and I want you to be like hanging from a ladder, shooting off these spells, right? That's what I want. And that is where I'm jealous. Like, I care less about, like, I don't, you hit all of them, whatever. But it's like, are you enjoying hitting all of them? Are you enjoying missing? Is it enjoyable that you swung and like fell into the barrel or whatever the hell, right? Like that to me, because that to me, like as a player, that is what's more interesting to me is like it's why for a long time I kind of bemoaned picking a fighter when I started playing Madden. It's like all I can do is swing my axe. It's so boring. And then eventually I was like, well, but what if the decisions I made had nothing to do with hitting the bad guy or not? So much it was, can I throw him off the train? Can I land this big bear trap on top of him? Can I, spin kick him into an aquarium or something? Like that. I think that because I came up playing 4th edition.
Yes.
I had never played before then. And 4th edition allowed everyone to basically be battle wizards. Whereas like if you were the fighter, you had like cleave and bull rush and stuff and like all these things that were basically spells that you cast with your sword. And it made combat way fun to the point where no one wanted to do conversational scenes because it was so much more boring than like throwing your axe in a circle to kill everyone around you or whatever. Right. And so they like even that out going into 5th edition and said like, hey, fighters fight, casters cast, that's it, right? Like that's where we're at.
Well, I think that there's part of the design in 5e as well that does hit 2 important things. For me, the Battle Master Fighter is all the coolness of that 4E thing.
Yep.
So deeply, deeply cool. But I also do appreciate the game design of something like the Champion, because clearly what the designers are doing in that moment is saying, there is a player out there who wants an incredibly rules light experience.
Yes.
And by giving
his name is Travis McElroy.
But like, crit on a 19 or 20, great ability, lets you get that feeling of critting more often. Yep. And
Indomitable is the same way. Like you blew a roll it again, right?
Yes,
like, right.
Exactly.
Perfect.
No, I love that. But I think for me, as someone who does love that crunch, so I think like having those battle mats, like, and I think for those who are watching this at home that are thinking about like, again, if you have the scratch to go out and get, Dwarven Forge, whatever, and get your whole maps and stuff like that, kudos to you, rad. For myself, especially, back when I was, for the 20 years I've been playing this game prior to having Dimension 20 as something I could use to play, it was like, like that was an affordability issue that there was no way I was going to have access to that. But getting a whiteboard and getting some, Crayola, dry erase markers, what I like about that is, yes, it involves it, like you're saying, it gets people into the idea of the world and the idea of how am I being creative and interacting with my environment. But I do also like the idea of, to me, there is an itch that gets scratched on if you are a sorcerer and you have lightning bolt and fireball. It is not necessarily a creative choice. It does get a little munchkin-y, but it is fun to look at a spread of enemies and be able to intuitively go, lightning bolt's going to be more effective with this scatter of opponents, right? That strategy board game element, it's very nerdy, but oh boy, do I love it.
I think it's what it always comes down to when you're DMing, which is like knowing your players, right? Of like, I know that especially Dad and Justin don't want to worry about if they're doing the right thing or not. Sure. They don't want to have to figure out like, oh, but could I get this 5th guy if I use? They want to use a spell and to use it and have it be effective, right? Like that, they want combat to move quickly. I think that is, people often comment on this, that the McElroys spend less time on combat than they do everything else. And it's because we like making jokes. Yeah. And so like a lot of our stuff tends to be more of the social aspect, and the combat moves a little quicker just because I don't know I think the only person that liked combat was me when I was playing Magnus and I could attack like 6 times in one, like that. And at that point, Justin and Griffin and Dad especially hated combat because they were like, is Travis done rolling yet? And I'm like, no, I still got 2 more.
there is a handling combat, I think, is very, very interesting. It's a huge part of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's what's also very interesting is combat can serve different things. Like sometimes your players are hungry for a combat against a hated villain that has all this dramatic weight, and there's this incredible. And sometimes your players are hungry for a bottle episode where it's
Right.
like skeletons, and they just get to,
I did a two-parter that I call Mission Imp Hospital. That was like a hospital had been overrun by imps, and it was basically them going through and cleaning it out.
yeah,
Right. And that was it. And so it was just them. I'd drawn the maps, and it was them going like room to room, kicking open doors and attacking whatever was in those rooms. Right. And it was imps every time. And it, it, it's one of the best things I have done in graduation, because what it became was very active. Here is your goal. This is what you're doing. And there's built-in downtime as you're moving from room to room and you're discussing the plan, where it came, I think, like 9 episodes into the whole series, and gave them a chance to do a lot of talking and a lot of like communication, that if you say to your players like, hey, your character should sit down and talk to one another, it won't happen. But if it's like, here's your goal, I can step back while you go around and do this thing, allowed them to kind of mindlessly kill these imps and use their brain space to like talk about it. Kind of like the scene in Princess Bride where they're like, once they figure out the traps of the fire swamp, he's just like talking to her as they're like jumping over everything. That kind of thing, right? And like sometimes it's amazing. The thing that came to me after that was sometimes that kind of like, another thing I miss in 4th edition is minions, where there are plenty of minions that it's like you hit them for 10 and they're dead now. But it used to be minions was like, if you hit them, they're dead, right? So it's just like the putties in like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
yeah,
And it was like the mindless battle that allowed the players to kind of gel as a team, that you'd want to like throw them right in the beginning of like, here is, a swarm of rats has attacked you, and like this is your kind of time to like see what your dynamic is, see who wants to take the lead, who's defending, who, all of that. And it's a good way as a DM to kind of get a feel for the combat styles your players like, of like, what can I give them? What can I do? Because here's the thing, and this is I think a shortcoming of my DMing, but it's that I find standard combat remarkably boring. When it's like, okay, you hit them, that was for 10, they have 100 hit points, so 9 more times of that and you got it. And I'm like, but that's just swing chunk, swing chunk, swing. That is nothing to me. And so like I'm always trying to spice that up, or add in things or change something or whatever, so that like I can make that feel not just more varied, but more controllable, more like they have input, and it's not just me putting a flesh wall in front of them that they have to break through.
I love that. With that said, how do you because I think that there's an interesting balance between, on the one hand, like I fully agree. I think that like I will do anything in my power to avoid, you're in a 20 by 20 room, there's a stack of hit points in front of you. Let's generate some random numbers and basically measure, we know you're going to beat this monster. How fast is it going to happen? So I think within that, what are the types of things that you will add to a combat, knowing that people do want to use their character features? Like the person with a sword doesn't necessarily want to just whack, 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 but also they do want to be a great sword fighter and want the experience and moments that highlight them in terms of confirming their character's identity. What are the type of things that you have found work for you adding into combat to create that narrative drive and avoid that sack of hit points experience?
I think of it very much like a laser tag arena, where I'm going to set up obstacles, I'm going to set up levels, I'm going to set up corners, anything that, and it's not just for the players, right? I want to give cover to my bad guys, like, so that they can climb up on stuff and get the high ground and uneven terrain, anything like that. I mean, I can't remember if it was you or Satine or Matt or B Dave. Somebody I talked to recently was talking about, like, if you think about a bar fight, I think it was Satine, that if you think about a bar fight, right, the thing that makes the bar fight interesting isn't the fight, it's the bar. And it's like the bottles and the chandelier and the fire in the fireplace and the instruments that the musicians are playing, like anything that you can grab. And so, I mean, it's the reason the rule of cool is so standard as far as a home game thing of like, yeah, there's no reason that should work, but that's very fun and cool. So roll with advantage, right?
Yeah.
Or something where it's like that to me is the kind of reward that you give. And also a lot of it is just setting up, I'm a sucker for an interesting monster. If I can find something where I'm like, okay, this is level appropriate, but it has this like special skill thing that makes it especially difficult for a rogue with low intelligence to overcome or whatever. Like that to me makes it more of a creative problem. So also I'm a sucker for like a trap or something where it's like, you got to defuse this bomb while these 3 hellhounds are attacking you.
Including any kind of other task in combat is immediate memorable encounter. Being like, okay, yes, we are fighting 6 werewolves. That has its own challenges. We also are performing dinner service because we're a catering company.
Right.
So we got to get these dishes out to the hungry customers. And like, as soon as you put that overlay on top of it, it's like, oh, this is the most fun.
I have this idea for, I'm going to do this like charity D&D stream for a Shakespeare company that I am closely connected with, where it's going to be the party is a theater company who's trying to put on a show to save their theater while the goblins from the Goblin Theater down the road are trying to sabotage it. And so they'll be performing while like the goblins are attacking and cutting sandbags and doing all that shit. And so they'll have to like make performance checks and all that stuff while they're doing it. And that to me is like the fun. It's the reason I enjoyed D&D and the reason we came back to it after all of the different, that I loved Monster of the Week and I loved Urban Shadows that I played for Dust, and I loved every system we played. But I think for the games that we like to play, having combat methods, having detection methods are all great. Mm-hmm. It's the other interaction, the performance checks, the deception checks, the insight check, like those things, the social checks that you can do that makes it like, is this person lying to me? And the GM can't just go, I don't know. But you're like, no, I'm going to roll. And it's like, yeah, you see a twitch in his eye. He's definitely lying to you. Like that is what makes the game so profoundly interesting to me. So being able to put that into a combat scenario and make it like, if you come with me, I can save you from this fight. And be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I trust this NPC that just randomly showed up here. Should we follow them? What do we do? Right? Like I try to give breaks in the action where it's like you're holed up behind the table. They're going to have to advance on you. You have at least one round before they get you. What do you do? So that you can make it clear that it's not just attack isn't always the best option, that it might be like, you know what? I remember seeing those runes on that blank doorway when we came in, and we're overwhelmed. We're going to lose. I'm going to take this turn to investigate, right? Giving them some breathing room where you are clearly signaling like you don't have to keep swinging to survive.
Yes.
Like that I think helps too.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And again, like peppering in that role-playing stuff, I feel like, when you're running combat, it's so important to, once a role has been determined, to again give voice to it in narration. Even something along the lines of like, oh, I rolled a 4, I don't hit, needs to be like your axe swings and the person nimbly dodges out of the way. Like as much as you can to add those narrations so that you're keeping people ensconced in the world.
And again, the thing I'm working on so hard, right? Because like because I'm always thinking about pace, right? Where it's just like, oh, we got to move. Okay, yeah, you missed. But like that, you're not weaving a narrative at that point.
Weaving a tale. I'll even do one thing I realized that I do in Dimension 20 sometimes is I will narrate people's rounds, and if we get to a moment where I realize that, like, specifically the last 3 or 4 or whatever turns PCs have taken stitched together in an interesting way, I'll like re-narrate everything. If someone's like, whoa, like, yeah, you toss the torch and the bar blows up. Okay, next PC. Okay, wow, you cast that spell. And we get to the end of that turn, I'll be like, okay, so just to reiterate, what everybody saw was a torch sails through the air as your lightning crackles across the thing. Yeah. And you go back and you're like, okay, let's actually put this all together now that we know what happened in this round of combat overall.
Between the two, between like a combat and a social interaction scene, which one do you think you're stronger at?
I think that what's interesting about this is I think that I have this huge weight of improv experience from doing long form improv that just, I think, puts a thumb on the scale for social interaction.
Yeah, same.
But I think that I try to be as leveled out as possible. I'm definitely working harder in combat than I am in the social interactions for obvious reasons, which is that pantomiming, like when you are having a conversation as an NPC with a PC, you are doing 99% of the work of what would literally be happening in the fantasy world.
Right.
When you're narrating combat, I am now a one-man band of a like 3D effects studio trying to impress this like, you know, full-scale rotoscoped like fantasy universe.
That's the thing. If you think about it, right, when you're doing the social, like you said, the DM is doing 99% of the work, to the point where even the PCs don't know if they know things, where they have to like ask you, like, do I know about this guy's family? Do I know about the history of this place? And if you switch it on the other side of combat, you are reacting to whatever they are doing. And it's like that, it's that shift in power. I think that I am trying so hard to get better at the combat, because I think I tend to think very verbally. Mm-hmm. And not very like visually. Yeah. And so I tend to talk well. I talk good. And so like when I'm doing a scene, like lines will pop into my head that are very effective and seem scripted, mm-hmm. if I could toot my own horn. But like I just made up the scenario, I made up the reaction, I made up everything right there in that moment. And I have the ability to say it with such confidence that it seems like I always had that planned, and that's what I was always working towards. And then we get into combat, and they're like, and where are the 3 bad guys? And I'm like, they're kind of like in front of you, but like a little off to the left, you know, like, so imagine you're looking like, it's kind of like 10 degrees, and it's like, gets very clunky. It's the kind of thing I'm trying to work on. That tends to be where a lot more of I've realized I need the prep work, is like, I will draw, even if it's just like crudely sketched, like a map of the combat encounters, so I can like see for myself where the obstacles are, where the interactable things are, so that if they ask, what do I see, I don't have to make it up on the spot. Yes. I can look at my little crudely drawn picture and say, there's a table with like 3 empty beer bottles and playing cards, and there's 4 torches on the wall, and there's like a broken barrel over in the corner, and like all of those things.
Well, I think that's very real. And I feel like, with rare exception, that's a lot of DM's experience. Because again, in saying like you're doing 99% of the scene, it's that, what I mean by that is like, if I'm playing the barkeep and the PC says something bizarre and I make a face for the barkeep, like, what the hell did you just say? That's the barkeep's real face. But right. I can't transform my face into a 15 by 15 jail cell yet.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but you keep working on that. And that was, you know, honestly, that was, I think, after one of the kind of hallmarks of balance was, I think, Griffin worked, I think, way too hard in the very beginning not to react. Oh, this sounds like an insult, but it's not. I think it's where a lot of the humor came from. Not react honestly to the absolute dumb shit stuff that our PCs were saying. It was like there was this real world, and then there was the PCs that we were playing in it. And like, I think then we got to the next major arc, Amnesty, and it was like, okay, this time we're all going to be present, And if you say some dumb shit that's going to upset the person you're talking to, you have to deal with the ramifications of that. And it's not just like, they're not just going to ignore that incredibly insulting thing you said because it was funny. Like, we're going to actually like play this scene out.
That's hugely, hugely important to do that for any number of reasons. Number one, to provide stakes and reality to the world. But also, it's very funny. There's actually an acting teacher I had who said one of the best pieces of acting advice I've ever heard, which directly relates to comedic improv, in which, again, if you're just coming up with jokes, that's one thing. But if you're doing a comedic scene, comedic scenes often thrive by having, you know, what in old vaudeville would be called like the straight man, right? Having a perspective of like, no, that's unusual what you're saying, right? I remember this acting teacher gave this advice where it was like, what do you do if you're in a scene with someone who is wildly overacting? What do you do if someone's just chewing the scenery, overacting? And the acting teacher's advice was, look at them like they're being horrendous. Look at them and be like, what the hell are you doing?
And are you okay? Are you okay is a great improv line. Are you okay?
Are you okay right now? What's going on?
Because it's acknowledging that the thing is happening and giving them an opportunity to attempt to explain what it is that they're doing.
Because what the teacher basically said is, if you don't react like this wild choice is being made, the audience is going to notice the wild choice too, be upset by it, notice you not reacting, and judge you as being complicit. And they're like, but if you give a reaction like if someone like breaks into a monologue and is like full Nicolas Cage, like the bees, right? Like you look like, whoa, that's a strong choice. Not only is the audience grateful to see you mirroring them, but it actually makes the wild choice look purposeful, and it actually makes it look better.
Well, now you and the audience are on the same side, right? Now it's like, oh, okay, something's happening, and I don't know what it is, but I trust them to ask the questions I want to ask. You know, the piece of advice that I got from my acting teacher, Brennan, we all did acting school, Brennan, was... My teacher, Doc Midge, phrased it like this: when you're like making choices as an actor, which is like, do what you would do and don't do what you wouldn't do. And I think about that, especially when I'm playing, when I'm a PC, where it's just like, okay, well, they're attacking me. And it's easy to sit there and be like, well, should I try to talk to them? Should I I want to do this, or like try to pay them? It's like, well, they're swinging a sword at me. So I think the thing I do in real life is raise my shield. And it's like, okay, yeah, then do that, right? Or I dodge or something, like, instead of trying to figure out. Or the other thing, and this is the thing that I tell people when they're talking about, like, I want to start playing D&D, but I'm afraid of, like, not knowing how to do it. I'm afraid of looking dumb. I'm afraid of messing up, which is like, okay, do what you would do and don't do what you wouldn't do. And like, if the DM says you're looking for information, you walk into a bar, I think we all know what you're doing is you're either going to talk to the bartender or you're going to look for somebody who has the information. Then you're going to ask them about the information. If they seem reluctant, you're going to offer to pay them, right? It's not like you're reinventing the wheel. It's like, you know, the process. And like the people who are like, I set the bar on fire. It's like, that's what you wouldn't do. You wouldn't do that because I gave you a task of get this information. And so unless you are just trying to fuck it all up, that is not what your character would do.
It is very, there is I mean, you're saying exactly what the foundations of what we used to teach in Improv 101 are, which is all about a rejection of artifice, right? A rejection of, because what you're talking about is, where does the impulse come from to do a thing you wouldn't do? It comes from a desire outside of the scene to do something interesting, which is like poison, right? There's almost a very Taoist element to it of like the way to do is to be, like, stop trying to do things and just exist in the moment. And you know, we find that all the time. We have like beginning improv students who would come in, and I remember there was a woman who was an executive at a large company who came in to take improv classes, and her mindset, she actually talked to me before the first class even started. She was like, hello, I'm the chief financial officer of a large corporation, and I want you to know that I am doing this to get outside of my comfort zone, and I do not believe that this will come easily to me. And I was like, Cool.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Great.
We're gonna do it. Scene number 1, someone initiates a scene to her. It's her first full scene she's doing, and someone initiates a scene to her. She's got like a full pantsuit on, like business chic, and this person initiates a scene, and they're like, hey mom, I got an F on my test, and she whips around and goes, sweetie, I'm in here fucking your father, and you were like, okay,
maybe she's a genius though, because that on some level is pretty funny.
It was just, and I went like, okay, I see where we're going. And it was so funny because I saw she just had this thing of, again, an external reality where she was
Michael Scott, I've got a gun. It's like, wait, hold on, no.
But it was so funny about it was like this woman had made a judgment of comedians, which is comedians are crass and will go vulgar. And she was like, okay, I'm going to apply the same business acumen that got me to the top of the corporate ladder. We're going to take what you're doing and we're going to win the scene. And it was like, but it was, you are right. It was in the moment one of the funniest things I'd ever seen.
Right.
But not sustainable.
It's right.
Yeah.
It's just funny to me.
Yeah. So there, but in what you're saying, I think we all have that friend that started playing D&D or doing a thing where it's like, okay, it's your turn in combat, and they're like, I light myself on fire, and you go, I know you're trying to impress your friends at the table by being silly right now. You can do this, but 20 minutes from now, you're with your dead character, the joke will have worn off, and we're not going to know.
Dumb.
Yeah.
This is the secret, right? This is something I learned. I had this friend named Chris. And Chris was the first, and still to this day, best person I've ever seen at funny dancing. Like being like at a club or a bar or whatever, the song came on, and it was funny dancing. And the reason I realized that Chris was so good at it is he wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to dance funny, right? But he was being so sincere when he did it that it was hilarious. Whereas if he was being goofy while he did it, it would be like, all right, man, I get it. But watching him sincerely have a good time dancing funny was so enjoyable to watch that I could have done it for hours, right? So there is a way to play a chaotic character that's like, maybe there is a pyromaniac who does want to set everything on fire, but you as the player are not, right? And so you are the one controlling this uncontrollable character. And so there is a way to do that. I'm not saying you can't have this erratic, uncontrollable character. Your character can be that. You, the player, aren't, right? Yes. And it's the same as if you're an improver, right? You can make these wild choices. Your character is wild. You, the actor, know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's really it. And of course, the funny thing is, as soon as someone shifts over to like having their honest reactions, the things they come up with are a million times more unpredictable. And like when you remove the artifice, it's so I honestly won't be able to recall an example because they're too infinite to recall. But it is so funny of that thing of, like, hey, so-and-so, like, what are you doing here in the garage? And the attempt to be funny of like, I'm farting super hard, ha ha ha, like, and you go like, oh, that's like stop trying. And you say like, no, just like, don't anticipate the question, just go into your heart and answer with the first thing that feels real. And you get some weird individual answer that couldn't, of like, hey, what are you doing here in the garage? And someone gets out of their own way and just goes deep and turns around and says something like, just looking at all my checkerboards. And immediately you go like, how many checkerboards do you own? Why is that?
Right. Now it's an interesting thing and everyone's leaning forward.
Why are you so sentimental about that? You seem sad. Like,
if you want an example, I think Griffin and I'm blanking on her name, played Bean and Ty.
Jess Ross and Lily Dew. Or sorry, Bean and Ty. So Griffin was Bean and
Lily. Griffin and Lily.
Yes, Griffin and Lily, exactly.
Everything they did was so perfectly in character and at times wild. Justin too. Justin is Rick Diggins. Like there were things that he would do. Still to this day, how nasty do you want it? Is one of the funniest things anyone's ever said. That like if you were trying to instigate that line, it would not have worked, right? Like, and like, I think that the thing is, if you're gonna get to these places, if you earn them, they are so much better. Like, this is the thing, right? If it's the reason, if you like, I also had an acting teacher tell me, like, it's way more interesting to watch someone try not to cry than it is to just watch someone openly weep and like really like rend and tear their garments. Because if you're watching someone try not to cry, you're like, you're there and you're leaning forward and you're like there with them, and then a drop rolls down their face and it's devastating, right?
Well,
Because like, you know, they don't want to and they are, and that's so much more powerful.
well, I love how we started talking about combat and have now come to completely the other side of this, which is really about how you construct narratives. Again, like, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got for storytelling is, when you're first writing a story, coming up with characters, you sometimes have this misconception that the thing that makes an audience feel an emotion is to see that emotion on stage. And so often that is not the case. Like,
No.
seeing someone angry doesn't make you angry. What makes someone angry is seeing something unfair.
Right.
And there's all these ways that you set up how to pass that feeling on. And again, like you're saying, like, watching someone break down and weep doesn't necessarily make you cry, but seeing someone try not to cry probably will. And
like, it's so much more heartbreaking to see someone in a heartbreaking scenario unable to react because of like outside forces, and watching them have to keep it where, like, you inside, then because they can't express it, it has to go through you. You're the outlet, right? Whereas if they get the release, you get a release too, and you're like, oh, thank God, I don't have to keep feeling that. There's a reason there's blackouts in theater, because it's like big emotional thing, wham, and it's like, oh no, please, please finish the scene. Oh no.
It's really, really true. And I think it's a great piece of storytelling advice for people, again, is to go through media that you love and think about what the things were that made you feel something. Because again, as a dungeon master, it can be really counterintuitive to know, okay, if I want response Y, I can't do Y. I have to do X, right? Like, I think about it all this, and I think, a lot of like theater people and literature people, people that write or perform and create art, do have these conversations. I've talked with like my partner Izzy so many times about like, just like conversation, like, yeah, like why did that make us feel that way? That thing we watched. Like, I remember one of the first conversations we had when we first started dating was about the stuff in media that made us cry, and I said, nothing in literature or film or television makes me cry more than the scene in A Christmas Carol when Bob Cratchit, it's spoilers for a more than century old.
Wait, which Christmas Carol?
A Christmas Carol. So Tiny Tim, Ebenezer Scrooge.
No, I know what Christmas Carol. Which version?
It's in multiple.
Asshole. I know which one it is. You know, the one that's got 3 ghosts. Yeah,
I thought you meant like Good King Wenceslas.
No, I meant which version. Ugh.
Brutal. It's the Muppet one. No, honestly, the Muppet one does slap.
The Muppet is tied for favorite.
What's your other one that's tied there?
It's Albert Finney's Scrooge from 1970.
Love it.
Full-blown musical with this really great dark gray art style. It's gothic and wonderful.
So across versions, this scene will get me, but it's the one where they go to the future and Tiny Tim is not there.
He's dead.
He's dead.
Just say it, Brennan. We're all adults here.
Tiny Tim is dead.
He kicked it. He shuffled the mortal coil.
This Tim is no more. And what you see is, Mrs. Cratchit and his brothers and sisters destroyed. And there is no Christmas there. And in your head, they set up the anticipation because they show how close Bob is to Tiny Tim. You're like, oh, Bob's going to be absolutely a shell. Mm-hmm. Like, looking at the family, you're like, Bob's going to be so devastated. And instead, Bob comes back into the... Is it
getting you right now?
It's getting...
Yeah.
He comes back in and he kicks the snow off his boots and he looks at his family, and instead of being destroyed. He is destroyed, but he turns around to his family and goes, I just visited Tim up on the hillside in the graveyard. His grave looks at the river, and I know he would love to watch the.
Mm-hmm. And he
And
talks. And he talks about you could hear the singing from the church, and he would have loved that. And yeah,
yeah,
dude.
It fully unmakes me every time I see it, because again, it's not the sadness, it's the fact that this is a destroyed person who is finding the strength within themselves to try to lend strength to people that they know are also.
You know what always gets me, Brennan? As long as they're talking about it,
yeah.
When someone make in movies, especially movies and TV show, when someone makes the difficult self-sacrificial choice, and it's like it would be so easy to, like, that's why Doctor Who gets me all the time, where it's like it would be so easy to just walk away here. It would be so easy, but I know I could never live with myself, so I'm going to give up something. Like, seeing that kind of sacrifice gets me. It's the scene. It happens in like stuff all the time where it's like, just walk away, leave them with me, and you can walk away, and you watch the person's face as they decide to like kind of tuck the person behind them, and they're like, nope, we're still. And I'm like, that gets me every time, just because it's like, seeing that is so like, because they're not going to say like, let me explain to you why I'm making this difficult choice. It's that I know why they're making that difficult choice. And it hurts me to see them make it, because I want them to be happy. I want it to be, and like that kind of thing where it's like, I want that for them. Teresa and I actually had a similar, when we first started dating, of what made us feel awkward watching like TV and stuff, because like shows like The Office, she cannot do.
Wow.
But she can watch surgery shows or like real like documentary things like that, and it does not bug her at all. Right? Yeah. Like she can't watch Supernatural with me because it's too scary, but she can watch surgery shows where a real human life is in the balance. And like for me, like I think that's another thing too, of one of the things that, not to woe is me, but I think one of the things that's really difficult about being a professional public DM or GM is you're not just playing to your players, right? You're playing for an audience too. And so sometimes you can get stuck in that thought of like, oh, I know that my players are going to love this scene. And then you put it up and like a third of your audience is like, bullshit. And you're like, no, you get it. They loved it. And it's like, that's not what I would have done. And you're like, man.
Well, that's the thing, is the nice thing about this game is if anyone feels that way, you can go play the game. If you think this should have gone a different other way, you can go do that in your home game, and it's totally fine.
Right.
That is a very interesting thing. And playing for those different audiences, I try to be as hermetically sealed as possible, which I know we all do. You do, Griffin does, I know Matt Mercer does it, of trying to remember that the reason people come to these adventures is because of the relationship that you have to your players.
Right.
So the more hermetically sealed you can keep that, the better. But of course, it's a very big challenge, because also it's a living, and we have to, you have to respond to what people's feelings are about the work that you're doing, like any craftsperson would.
Right.
We actually have been gabbing away and having a ball. We have questions to get to. We've just been scootalooting along.
Question 1: what's your perfect Sunday afternoon? How do you unwind after a long day of Dungeons and/or Dragons?
Exactly. This question comes to us from Vector Man. Thanks, Vector Man. Travis, have greatly enjoyed your work on the Adventure Zone and elsewhere. Tiny heist! Exclamation mark in parentheses.
Yeah.
Both as a player and as a game master. The Adventure Zone is unique in how y'all use multiple systems for different campaigns. My question is, which comes first, the story or the system? That is to say, do you pick a system and then develop a story that the system would service well, or do you first decide on the story or premise and then pick a system that could best support it?
Oh man, I wish there was a straightforward answer for that, but like, yes, like the thing is like, so with Dust, originally, I had it in my head that I was going to develop a brand new game system from scratch to play that game. And that was a terrible idea because developing a new game system is, spoiler, a lot of work.
Sure.
And I had it in my head that I was going to do this game system where instead of dice, it was all about card draw, where you could play it with a deck of cards and it would feel like you were playing like an Old West, like saloon game. And there would be like quick draw, and basically depending on what class you were, you would have different combinations of cards and you were drawing against them. And so your stats would be like, if you're good at that thing, then your cards are like 8 to king. And if you're bad at that thing, your cards are like 2 to jack, right? Or whatever.
Mhm.
And you're drawing it. But like, it was so, like, even as I sat down and tried to write out the concept, it was so complicated. And by that point, I had already come up with the concept for Dust. And I was like, oh no. So I went on like a deep dive looking for systems. And I found Urban Shadows, but Urban Shadows is built for like a city. Like you're in like Chicago, right? And I was like, but I have like an Old West town with like 3 streets. And I ended up talking with the creator of Urban Shadows. And I said, hey, I'm going to do this. Does it break your game? And he said, no, that's cool. Go for it. And I said, thanks. And then with with then with graduation, I immediately knew because it basically came from Tiny Heist. We had played Tiny Heist, and the first night, after recording the first 3 episodes, Justin, Griffin, and Dan and I went out to dinner, and we were like, I miss Dungeons and Dragons so much. Like we had forgotten how much fun it was because like we finished Balance, and Balance was such a huge thing that we're like, we can never do D&D again, and then we missed it, and so like. Those were kind of developed together. But I think Monster of the Week gave rise to Amnesty.
Yeah.
And I know that Fate, the superhero Fate module, gave rise to. So I think it just depends. Sometimes you're inspired by the system. Sometimes the story idea makes you look for a certain system. I think it just depends on how you like to do it.
Hell yes. And I think that makes a ton of sense too. And there's obviously like a lot of what Dimension 20 does is like heavily mod D&D.
Yeah.
But you can also do that kind of with any system. And, you know, even like I remember running the Dadlands one shot for you guys,
Right.
which was so fun, which was the first time publicly playing that system.
It was the first time anyone had played that system, Brennan. The first time that system had ever been played.
First time ever been played. And obviously, like, I feel similarly to you where there is a skill set of a spectrum that runs from game designer to GM, right? And yes, running games a lot will give you some insight into principles of design, even if it's as simple as homebrewing monsters or magical items,
Right.
which is a bit of design. But for me, when I talk to serious designers, I feel like a professional driver talking to professional mechanics.
Right.
That's how different the skill set is.
Exactly.
It's like, yeah, we both work with cars, but man, do you know a lot more than me about what is actually.
And I guarantee that the mechanic is a better driver than you, the driver, are a mechanic, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
Yeah.
The mechanic still drives to work and back.
Right,
I
exactly.
don't fix the car, you know, like
I don't do that.
But that being said, it can be a little bit intimidating to get into the nuts and bolts of a system. And obviously for me as well, like I've spent so much of my life in different editions of D&D running stuff outside of that systems from time to time, but definitely have felt like, you know, when I talk to people that are like, oh yeah, I've run like 20 different things. I've run 10 games of this and 15 games of that. And I go like, we played some White Wolf when I was 14, you know, like, and that's sort of the experience that I'm coming from. It can seem very daunting, but I think what's important is even running that Dadlands one shot. I remember that, you know, we were making rules adjudications on the fly as it felt necessary for the story. I remember that poll that your dad made to just like save the group, right?
Yeah.
Which is like something that you look for in the moment and go like, oh, like that's not part of the rules that we discussed, but it feels right for this moment.
It works. And that's
Yes.
the thing is I've gotten a chance now to talk with many game designers of of different games, and never once, if the discussion turns to like, can I not use this element or can I change this thing? I've never been met with resistance on that. Almost always they're like, yeah, dude, do it. Like, yeah, use it, don't use it. As long as you're enjoying it, yeah, go for it.
Exactly. Our next question comes to us from our friend Viechor. Thank you, Viechor. I appreciate it. The question is, hey guys, both of you have run / are running campaigns with heavy anti-capitalistic themes, and I love them. My question is, how do you do that in a way that's empowering and not just depressing? I'm planning a campaign setting entirely based on capitalism and the difficulty of ethical consumption. In the really infuriating, hopelessly capitalistic world we live in, I don't want to just remind my players of how awful it is in a game that's supposed to be escapist. I want to empower them and let them tear down the awful system. Do you have any advice for me? Thanks. This is a great question, and I think potentially a very heavy one that there's like
Yeah.
multiple stuff to reference. My first reaction to this would be that anytime I have done IRL activism work, there is a lot more joy in the work than maybe being exclusively in online spaces
Yeah.
would communicate. If you are at protests, if you're organizing your space, if you're doing political canvassing, if you're getting involved with a union for the first time, there's a lot more joy in the work of opposing these systems IRL. So I would say that, like, in terms of doing anti-capitalist work or doing anti-racism work or doing anything where you're actually getting involved and getting your hands dirty opposing an oppressive system, that is less depressing than often the day-to-day reality of just consuming information and news, which tends to communicate the problem more than it does the active steps that are being
Yeah.
taken. Um,
I,
so, yeah.
I think to that point, right? Like, so anti-capitalism, anti-government, however you want to look at it. Because I mean, yeah, definitely. When I think about capitalism and government here in America, they're pretty inextricably linked for me. But like, I think that there's a tendency to think in terms of like V for Vendetta, where it's like so oppressive and obvious, and it's like bad, and everybody, and we live in a broken capitalist system now, and to some degree, there are a lot of comparisons you could make, but it is not that every day, every single minute for everyone all the time. So like there are, there are waves. And I think that it's finding moments of levity. Because if you're looking for an escapist thing, right? I would let it build to that, because that's what I tried to do with graduation. Is like start of like, you're out of school, right? And this is the system we live in. And then as the game went on, made it more and more and more and more and more obvious the faults of that system, that it was oppressive, that it was, at times restrictive and judgmental, and that it rewarded privilege, all of these things, right? Instead of just right out the gate, right at the beginning, like, we live in a world where everyone is oppressed and sad all the time, right? Like, let that be the world, but that doesn't have to be the situation. Right. The situation could be like, the three of you are having a great time at the bar. And like, then, it becomes more and more obvious that something needs to be done. Also, giving definitely that there are opportunities to change it, and not just like, this is what you're stuck with, now go on an adventure, but rather like, you have a goal that you're working towards. There are things you can change and fix, and you don't just have to accept the world as it is. Can be in many ways escapist in and of itself, right? Because some of the times where I have felt most depressed, especially in the last 4 years, is those moments where it's like, I can't do anything. I've been doing things, I've been trying to help, I've donated my time and money and used my platform, and still nothing. And having then the added like therapy group session of being like, but I can ride a dragon into the castle. Like that, I think would be escapist in a non-avoidant way.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Escapism is a very broad term, right?
Yes.
And it's also very like I feel like I have a complex relationship with the term escapism. First of all, I should give a big caveat, right, that all of these are personal feelings, and I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all answer here for any of the stuff that we're talking about.
I will also say I am a straight, white, cisgender dude, of moderate income who does need, that kind of thing. So I also recognize that when I'm talking about escapism and playing D&D while bad shit is happening in the world all the time, there's obviously a level of privilege there that I must acknowledge in my answer.
Right. That similarly for me, that is a perennially available grain of salt on everything I say that should go with every single thing I've ever said, publicly and privately. So the deal with escapism for me here is it all depends on what you are trying to escape, right? And by that, I think what I'm trying to say is when some people say escapism, what they are referring to is I am trying to escape from a world with these problems.
Right.
And I think that there's obviously like Dimension 20 seasons have often made a lot of choices around this that are like, hey, we're going to depict capitalist bad guys, but we're not going to depict transphobia
right.
or homophobia towards our PCs, right? And like there are ways in which those worlds get handled in terms of different forms of how we're going to make them safe for our viewers, how we're going to make them more accessible. For me, one of the interesting things is I like escapism too, but I remember being a kid and playing house with my little sister, and I was at that point, I think, much older. She was like 6, and I think I was like 12 or 13 at the time, and was like. So I was being like an older brother, kind of helping her out and being like, yeah, let's play house. That sounds fun. And she was like, we're going to get blueberries for blueberry pancakes. And I was already a dungeon master at this point. So I was like, great, let's go get some blueberries. Wait a minute. What's that noise? There's something coming. And she would whip around and go, no, nothing is coming. We're going to make pancakes. And I was like, whoa, shit.
Okay, cool, great.
Cool. But the instinct for me to in a realm of imagination, create some kind of problem to tackle, right. That's never gone away. And I don't know that there's some big philosophical motivation for that. That might just be temperament. It might just be that when I go to Fantasyland, I'm looking for a dragon. And not everybody is. Some people are looking for blueberry pancakes. But to me, what I would say about the dragon world, the world where there's some big problem to solve, is that's also a form of escapism. Because what the escapism can be is, hey, what if the problems of the world, instead of being these largely intangible, non-nuclear, systemic things. Yes. What if it was one fucking orb and you could go find that orb?
You just gotta smash the orb, guys. Oh, cool. Great.
That is like, hate to break it to you, that's powerful escapism. Like the idea of the world's evil being in a ring that you can throw into a volcano is one of the most deeply powerful forms of escapism that there has ever been, right? Yeah. That evil could be condensed into an object and disposed of so easily. And even in the metaphor of the hard journey to Mordor, it's like, if someone came to you right now in real life and was like, hey, would you walk across Death Valley to get rid of evil? It's like, damn, yeah, I would do that. Like, yes, that's going to be very hard, but what an immediately doable way to...
An actionable thing. I'll tell a secret. I'll tell a secret here. My game is not about defeating capitalism. That might be what happens in it, and that's great. My game is about seeing what the three main characters do when faced with these scenarios and these systemic problems and these things, right? Of like, you don't win graduation by defeating capitalism. you move the story forward by reacting to it in a certain way. And so that's the thing is I didn't set out to be like, I'm going to stick my players in a world where they have to stop capitalism. Like, it was more just like, I'm going to put them in a world where the system is broken and then see what they want to do about that. And that is where it has gotten to. And I love it very much. But, you know, a year ago when I started Graduation, I was like, oh, I can't wait till we get to the scene about crushing capitalism. That wasn't the plan at all, but it works. It's great.
Well, and I think that's the thing, too, for me as well, is one of the things I'm very aware of, again, from teaching improv, is that allegory is really tricky. And I also want to say too that I appreciate there's a kind of a compliment buried into the question about like including themes in D&D campaigns. And one of the things I want to stress to people as well is I am a comedian. Like I don't know nothing. Like there's so much I don't know. I always feel like, again, like a bunch of my metaphors that I put into things are often, to me, feel very clumsy. Because, again, I love philosophy. I love studying this stuff. But, again, I am a student of it on a very amateur level. Like, I didn't spend, 10 years getting a doctorate in history or sociology. I spent 10 years doing improv comedy. So everything that I do is very much as like, but the reason I still try to put those themes in there is because it has been impressed upon me by people a lot smarter than me that themes are present in your work, whether you put them there or not.
Yes.
And so because fantasy is rife with and has a history of very problematic allegories, the reason I've made all this shit anti-capitalist isn't because I'm like, I'm uniquely gifted to be able to tell a moral. I honestly feel like I'm honestly trying to catch up with a lot of the smarter and better thinkers that I admire. But I am also aware that if I don't put those themes in there, other themes are going to sneak in, right?
Graduation was born out of wanting to make fun of Harry Potter. And I don't mean like make fun of people who read Harry Potter or whatever. I mean make fun of a lot of themes and a lot of the absolutely bullshit stuff that J.K. Rowling, not even the turf bullshit, which is, of course, like that is a huge I mean, like in the books where it was like, this is a problem and this person and it's just like, hey, this is obviously like only non-problematic if you're like straight and white and stuff and Protestant. And like there's so much of that in the books that I was like, I'm just gonna kind of like make this kind of a satire of that. I'm gonna make this like a and then it was unavoidable, I think, because if you look at the last year, the things that I was just seeing in the world and the things that we've all been really discussing since in the last year, it's hard for the game not to have taken that turn. Like for me, where it's just like, I set it up with a broken system, and more, just in the last year, the amount that we've become aware of how broken our system is, there was no way I was going to keep those two separated in my mind. Like it would be impossible. I cannot see a timeline in which I was not influenced by how much movements like Black Lives Matter and just seeing the corruption in government and not dealing with the coronavirus epidemic, just seeing that stuff and how privileged a lot of the people are that like don't have to worry about that shit. Like that became such an influence on me because how could it not? You know?
1,000,000%. So again, I think it's one of those things, to take that in the sphere of this question. I totally hear the idea of like, is this a play space or is this a space to explore what is going on in the world? And I think that that's a question for each and every person in their table based on what you're looking for in the experience. Far be it from me to tell a group of people that are dealing with all of these oppressive systems in real life that they can't go to a soft and cozy wonderland in their play space. Absolutely. But I think for especially there's like there, and I think that those pressures become very different depending on what you're doing. If you're making a piece of media, for example, that's going to be consumed by people versus what you're doing just for you and your friends at home, that might change the internal sort of philosophical, sociological math for people. I think that there's an element of like. If we're gonna we want to tell these like high epic stories of like combat and struggle and combat mattering and who are we fighting. So for me, it's always like, okay, let's make our dragon bad guy a libertarian capitalist,
right?
Because I don't want the allegory of what dragons meant in the mythic past, because that doesn't feel as relevant and it doesn't feel like something that I necessarily ascribe to. So like, let's put, in other words, like, the reason that I think you can put these morals into a game without feeling like you're ruining the escapism is those two things of overcoming oppressive systems is a form of power fantasy, which feels good.
Yeah.
And then number two, it is that worry that I often have of, hey, allegory is going to seep its way into your work, whether you want it to or not. And anyone who's made a piece of content or media that is large enough can look at their work afterward and go like, oh my God, did that allegory make its way? Like, did it something that I didn't intend make its way in there? So oftentimes making sure that you are being clear about what your world means in some ways is sometimes a nice panacea to that effect of going like, I know that this adventure's gonna mean something. Might as well try to make it mean something. Right. I agree.
At least I can control the thing it's going to mean. I would also say, in a very practical piece of advice, the X card system, which is having a note card or something with an X on it that your players can hold up if the conversation starts towards an area that for them triggers a trauma experience or that they are uncomfortable discussing or anything like that. And then you don't discuss the X card, you just acknowledge it, you rewind and go down a different alley. Also, Victoria Rogers of the Broadswords clued me into another system that's the green light, yellow light, red light, where green light is just like you have the green card out, when it's just like, I'm comfortable with this. Let's do this scene. This is great. The yellow card is like, oh, this is a little dicey, but I'm willing to play it out. Let's see how it goes. And the red card is like, no, we need to stop this conversation. This is making me, the player, uncomfortable and making it so I am not enjoying this experience and we need to do something else.
Yeah. Highly, highly recommend those safety tools, X card, lines and veils. These are really, really helpful systems to help protect your table.
Because remember, it's fine to want to make the characters in uncomfortable situations. You should always be trying to make sure your players are comfortable and feel safe.
100% agree. We're gonna move on to this. We have another great question. I actually love this question. This is great. Elliot asks, thanks, Elliot. How do you balance having a DMPC that feels like a rounded character and not just an extra robot weapon per round with keeping your authority out of the party's decision-making process? So this is actually a great term that's not an official. This is one of those things that is a community term and not a kind of game term. So for those that don't know, watching this, a DMPC is kind of an informal word for a non-player character, for an NPC that is such a trusted ally of the PCs, or that becomes so like ingrained with them that it almost becomes like the dungeon master is now playing a party member. So examples of this, I think, would probably be like Minetta from Tiny Heist as a DMPC. I think
Angus McDonald from Balance was that way.
Like Rog and Sandra Lynn and Tracker from sophomore year are kind of like DMPCs in a way. And the question being asked here is twofold, right? Because it's asking, feel like a rounded character, which is one question. And the other question they bring up is interesting about keeping your authority out of the party's decision-making process, right?
So I can give two quick pieces of advice with that, right? Where the well-rounded is the tricky thing. I think the best thing is to make your character choices a lot more reactionary to the PCs, right? Of like, if they trust you, right? Because this is the thing, is sometimes you'll create a character, an NPC, where like, this is going to become a major character. And it's like, no, they did not. They did not care about that person. But they want to know about this sexy turtle guy that they found in the casino. And he's going to be a fucking major player in the game. Right. And it's just like, okay, cool. I'm reacting now. And the character traits that they are projecting. If someone's like, you're kind of a weird guy, be like, okay, great. Now, like, I'm not going to say, like, he's actually not a weird guy. You just have, I'm like, okay, great. Yeah. Or if it's just like, man, you love blowing stuff up, don't you? Like, yep, he sure does. You got it. Absolutely. And let them kind of project onto that a little bit. The other thing, at least my kind of cheat for the authority, is like group dynamics going into it. Because when I started graduation, I had them as like all three of the PCs were like hench people or sidekicks, right? And so then the problem became they were working for a hero or villain. So how did I justify the hero or villain not telling them what to do? Right? They were working for them. So I very quickly was like, well, I have to change the dynamic of this very quickly.
Yeah.
So now, because Griffin, his character became the villain, and technically, Dad and Justin's characters are sidekicks. Now, if I introduce another character, they're coming into this group dynamic where there's a unit of 3 and them. So it makes sense why they would defer to this villain and their sidekicks, because that's the group and they are the guest. Right. And so it's like, okay, yeah, totally makes sense why they would, even if that person has the information, that they can say, like, here is where this is the guy that's in there. This is what we need to do. I'm following your lead because you're the group and you're the leader of that group and I'm an outsider.
I love that advice. Status within the party is very, very tricky, right? Even like we had adult characters serving as cohorts for a group of teen adventurers in Fantasy High. And one of the things the adults had to say really quickly was, hey, we can't make executive decisions because it'll impact your grade. You're being graded on this adventure.
I did that too in my school thing.
Great minds, look at that, buddy.
Always set your things in a school. That's what we're saying.
But one of the things that I recommended there was like keeping the focus on player autonomy is really important. Mm-hmm. Because there is, you kind of want the needle in the middle of the gauge there, right? Because on the one hand, look, like there's a big part of me that loves the idea of the fellowship so much that I have often in games been like, ooh, what if it's just the PCs all alone and there's no one there to help them? Dark Night of the Soul. I always do it. I always think it's going to be a great idea. And then all of a sudden I realize I don't have any voice in PC discussions. It can be really tricky. And the reason it can be tricky is not because I want to put a thumb. Well, I do want to put a thumb on the scale, but not for the reason of not having trust in the PCs. Often it's for cleaning up my own mistakes. I can't tell you how often I will have PCs in a dungeon and you're like, you're all alone in the dungeon and there's strange carvings on the wall. Here's this puzzle. And the PCs will go and they're like, well, this doesn't make sense. This puzzle is missing one of the numbers. And suddenly you realize, like, I fucked up. The puzzle is unsolvable. Like, you realize you, the DM, made a mistake. So one of the nice things about having an NPC there is they can be like, oh, look, a tile fell down over in this corner of the room. You know, you have that. And again,
I think that's also true in, like, social things where it's just, like, if someone's lying, and like someone's lying to them, right? And they blow their rolls, and there's like a trusted person that they can say, like, what do you think? And they're like, I don't trust it. Not saying here is the lie. This is what you would have learned if you had gotten that roll, but just more of like, because this is something you and I talked about, right? Of like, in graduation, I'd set up all this stuff and the system that I wanted them to break, right? And you were the one who said to me, like, have you made it clear to them that the system needs to be broken? And I was like, no, I want them to just figure that out. And it's like, no, you need to have like at least one NPC say like, this system sucks, right? So that they're like, yeah, okay, thank you, right? Because you need some kind of hint, some kind of relay between DM to player narratively speaking, that says I see what you want to do, and I'm allowing you to do it without me as the DM having to go, hey, if you guys want to do this, you can, because that's going to suck them right out of the scene. But having someone go, hey, I see what you're thinking, don't do it, right? Like, if you do this, you know it's going to break bad, right? And then they still have the choice to be like, fuck you, dude, I'm doing it. Or have them be like, oh, but I want to, oh, but you're right. Like, giving them some kind of like handhold, not necessarily telling them what to do or trying to control them, but just giving them like, I'm going to crack this door open if you want it. Okay, you didn't want it. That's totally fine. Great.
Again, those DMPCs are really, really helpful. And I want to be clear that it's not, again, it's never about removing player autonomy, but there are just moments that come up. Here's what DMPCs help to address. They help to address the fact that you will never be able to communicate an amount of information from the world that the PCs would actually have access to. Picture, again, I keep referencing Lord of the Rings. Picture the moment where Gandalf is trying to figure out the 3 ways they're going to go in the Mines of Moria, right? And he ends up saying, like, oh, the air smells fresher this way, let's go this way, right? You as a DM communicate to your PCs, you see 3 hallways. One smells nasty fucking rank BO. Right. One smells like ash, and the other smells fresh and clean. Your PCs are very likely to go, fresh and clean, that's a trap. Let's go the rank nasty way. Why are they going to do that? Because in real life, your players don't actually have access to Gandalf's 200 years of previous adventuring experience. So and that's why a lot of times if a player rolls high, as a DM, I won't just communicate information, I will communicate their interpretation of that information. I'll be like, the air smells fresher that way. You think that's a way safer way to travel. Like I will give them their interpretation, because again, in real life, when you're at a party and someone is talking to you and they haven't said anything untoward, but you just get a vibe of like, this person doesn't seem that friendly. Right. There are often a lot of things that can't even be communicated at the table that have to do with the vibe at the party. What time of day is it?
Especially not without you just spelling it out. If you're like, and his eyes are real shifty, and they're like, okay, great, he's untrustworthy. And it's like, yeah, I had to just tell you that. Like, I, the DM, had to just lay out. It's the same actory thing of like, how do you lie and not make it like mustache twisty? Like, I've never seen him before. It's like, yeah, you're fucking lying. Of course you have. And having a DMPC was like, I wouldn't trust him if I were you. I've had this experience and blah, blah, blah. It's like, makes it seem narratively more sense. Like, yeah, of course this person would tell you that. You trust them, they trust you, they don't trust that guy. They're going to make that decision, as opposed to you, the DM, having to say like, I don't think you should trust that guy. Like, thanks, Travis.
And again, to have that thing of, look, we've all, I don't know why I have Lord of the Rings on the mind right now, but they go up Caradhras and the Saruman hits the mountainside and, the snow falls and someone's like, we have to turn around, we'll never make it. That's a very classic DMPC thing to do, because someone is being like, we have to turn around. I only made the maps for Moria. I don't have anything planned for the mountains. And that can be okay. It can be okay to have an NPC that is steering things in a direction towards more fun for the PCs, right? Obviously, I'm of the mind that you should honor PC choices where and when you can, and improvise everywhere you are able to. But especially if there's something really, really fun that the PCs are going to hate to miss, I think it can be okay to have that DMPC who is a trusted ally being like, I've thought about it and I think it might be more. Also, by the way, let me put a caveat on this. 9 times out of 10, if you're doing your DMPC right, they are not going to be countermanding the PCs. Right. Your PCs will often look to the DMPC and be like, What do you think we should do?
Right.
Because in moments of indecision for them, they are going to like that there's a moment to get some in-world input from their friend at the table that they know is running the game.
Right. If you're going on an event, if I were in real life going on an event, I'd hire a guide. Right? Like, yeah, I want an adult there who knows more than I do. It's fine.
A million percent. Well, that is, I think, great. And again, I think well-rounded is just a thing that should be applied to all NPCs as well.
Right. And they can be wrong. That's the other thing too. Is flawed, biased, all of those things. Because like, what you don't want is some kind of robot who's just spitting out the facts and answers that they need. Someone who's like, I don't know. Like, that's the thing, is like, I know things as the DM. That doesn't mean all of my NPCs know those things. When I played Dust, I made a very complicated, overly complicated, some might say, flowchart of like, if you ask this person, they know this, but they don't know this, but they know this. And depending on what time you ask them, they know this and this, or they're asleep, or they're at this place. Because it was like, I know it, but just because you ask Steve doesn't mean Steve knows it because I know it. And having those things of like, yeah, this is a big chunk of news that I'm not just gonna give you. Yeah. Have your NPC go, I don't know. This is also my first time doing this, right? And it's just like, okay, and that can also be a clue to the PCs of like, you don't need to know this right now, right? Yeah. Because I don't know it. That means like, if it was something you needed to know right now, I'd tell you.
I think that is incredibly helpful. To bear in mind that your world should have that verisimilitude to it. Well, dang, I can't believe it.
We only did like 3 questions, Brennan.
I know.
We only so much.
We did, but they were really good questions, and there's a lot to cover in them.
I'll just have to come back.
Yes, 100%. I truly wish for you to come back, and also for us to be able to play again at some point in the future.
Please.
Would be amazing. Enormous thanks to our wonderful guest, Travis McElroy. Travis, a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you so much. Me too. I really, sincerely, I would not be happy, let alone talented, if I am at all as a GM, without your guidance, sir. I've looked to you many, many times, and I have appreciated your help immensely. You have talked me through a lot of things, and both like personal reactions to feeling insufficient to actual like, how do I deal with this thing in the game? And I wouldn't be here without, like I said, I've talked to, just in the last like 3 months, you, Austin Walker, Satine Phoenix, Matt Mercer, like B Dave, like all of these people that I'm like, how I get good at this, how I be better. And that's another thing. If you want to get better at this, keep asking questions. Ask people that you know that play. They didn't spontaneously know it. They figured it out by asking. You can go online, man. I've taken to just Googling like how to make combat better and just like reading it. There's so many great videos, like YouTube tutorials. Like, if you want to get good at it, you don't have to do it in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, what a profound and staggering honor for truly someone who's one of my favorite D&D players of all time. And also someone I've just been listening to. I mean, man, I was back in New York laughing my ass off to my Bam Bam. So that means the goddamn world to me, dude.
I've never watched or listened to anything you've done. So the honor is all yours. No.
God damn it. So much love to Travis. Thank you so much for being here, my friend.
Thank you.
This has been Adventuring Academy. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.